All right, let's dive into Genesis 47. This is a chapter that asks a really tough question. What happens when an entire nation runs out of food? We're talking about a story of survival, power, and how one family's reunion ends up changing the destiny of a whole kingdom. It's intense.
So let me ask you this, right off the bat. In a real crisis, what would you be willing to trade for survival? I mean, really think about it. Your money? Your house? What about your freedom? The people in this story, they don't get to just think about it. They have to make that choice. And that's the heart of Genesis 47, which we're going to walk through right now, verse by incredible verse.
Okay, so our story kicks off with Joseph. He's basically running Egypt at this point, second only to Pharaoh, and he's finally about to introduce his long-lost family to the king. Imagine the scene, a family of shepherds meeting the ruler of the most powerful empire on earth. The culture shock is going to be off the charts.
All right, verse 1. Joseph goes to Pharaoh and makes it official. My father and my brothers, they're here. They're in Goshen. Just picture Joseph standing there in his fine Egyptian linen in front of this massive golden throne. This isn't just him saying, hey, the fam's in town. No, this is a formal state announcement. Then in verse 2, he does something really smart. He doesn't just parade his whole family in. He handpicks 5 of his brothers and presents them to Pharaoh. So just imagine these 5 guys, weathered from the sun, hands rough from work, wearing simple shepherd's clothes, walking into this opulent palace. The contrast would have been absolutely staggering.
Okay, verse 3. The spotlight swings over to the brothers. Pharaoh looks these guys up and down and asks a really simple, direct question. So, what do you do for a living? You can just see the king leaning forward trying to size them up. And they answer straight up, no fluff. Your servants are shepherds. Then, verse 4, they get right to the point. Picture one of them stepping forward, maybe a little nervously, and explaining, we've come here to find a place to live, because the famine back home, it's wiped everything out. There's no pasture for our flocks. It's not a demand, right? It's a humble plea for refuge.
So, verse 5. Pharaoh turns back to Joseph, and his response is, wow. Picture him making this grand gesture, saying, look, the land of Egypt is yours for the taking. Settle your family in the very best part of it. But he doesn't stop there. Verse 6, he goes even further. He tells Joseph, and hey, if any of your brothers are really good at what they do, make them the chief herdsman over my livestock. See, this is brilliant. It's not just generosity. Pharaoh sees their expertise and immediately wants to use it. It's a generous offer for sure, but it's also a really smart business move.
Now for verse 7. This is a big moment. The brothers step back, and Joseph brings in his father, the patriarch Jacob himself. Just try to visualize this. An old man, probably leaning heavily on a staff, walking up to the most powerful man in the world and blessing him. A humble shepherd blessing a mighty king. What a reversal. Then in verse 8, Pharaoh looks at this ancient, wrinkled face, and all the pomp and ceremony of the court just seems to melt away. He asks him a very simple, very human question. How old are you?
And Jacob's answer in verse 9, it's one for the ages. Picture him looking Pharaoh right in the eye and saying, I've been on this pilgrimage for 130 years, and they've been few and difficult. Wow, he's not just given a number, he's giving the summary of a long, incredibly hard life. Then, in verse 10, as he's about to leave, he does it again. He blesses Pharaoh a second time. It's like a powerful bookend to this incredible meeting, and then he's gone.
So, verse 11, Joseph doesn't waste any time. He takes his family and settles them, just as Pharaoh said, in the best of the land of Ramesses. We're talking prime real estate. And then verse 12 gives us this incredible payoff moment. Picture Joseph, the same guy his brother sold into slavery, now handing out bread to his entire family, to his father, to the very brothers who betrayed him. He's ensuring their survival. He's not the victim anymore. He's the provider. The promise is fulfilled.
Okay, so the camera pulls back now. We zoom out from this family reunion to see the bigger picture. The famine isn't getting better. It's getting much, much worse. The first part of Joseph's plan, selling grain for money, is about to run its course, and now people are about to find out the real price of bread. Verse 13 paints a bleak picture. Imagine the entire land, both Egypt and Canaan, just baked dry. The famine is so bad it says the land languished. There is simply no bread. Now verse 14, we see Joseph's plan in action. Picture these long, endless lines of people clutching sacks of money, trading it all for grain. Joseph systematically gathers up all the silver in the entire known world. And then, verse 15, the inevitable happens. the money is gone. Imagine a huge crowd of Egyptians coming to Joseph, their pockets empty, and one of them pleads, "Give us bread. Why should we die right here in front of you? Our money's all gone."
So, the money's gone. What now? Well, Joseph is about to roll out phase 2 of his plan. And this is where things get really intense. The stakes are about to be raised from just money to, well, to everything else. Their property, their animals, and yeah, even their freedom.
So, verse 16. Joseph lays out the next step. No money? Fine. Bring me your livestock. I'll trade you grain for your animals. And that's exactly what happens in verse 17. For a full year, just picture this massive exchange happening all over Egypt. People bringing their horses, their donkeys, their sheep, everything they have, and walking away with food. By the end of the year, Pharaoh owns all the livestock. Now, verse 18. The next year comes and the people are back. They're even more desperate. They tell Joseph, "We have nothing left, only our bodies and our land." So in verse 19, they make the ultimate desperate offer. Buy us. Buy our land. Just give us food, and we will be Pharaoh's servants. And in verse 20, Joseph does it. In one of the biggest real estate deals in history, he buys all the land of Egypt for Pharaoh. The people are now tenants on land they used to own.
This leads to verse 21, a massive social upheaval. Joseph moves the people from their ancestral lands into the cities. Imagine entire populations being relocated. This isn't just about food distribution, it's about centralizing control. But then verse 22 gives us a really important exception. There's one group whose land Joseph didn't buy, the priests. Why? Because the priests got their food rations directly from Pharaoh. So picture a priest standing on his own land, totally secure, while the rest of the country is being uprooted. They were a protected class, completely outside of this new economic system.
And you have to understand, this wasn't just a temporary fix for the famine. Joseph was engineering a whole new society, a permanent one, with Pharaoh at the absolute top of the pyramid.
So, verse 23. Joseph gathers everyone and lays it out plain and simple. "Listen up, I have bought you and your land for Pharaoh." No mincing words. And then, picture this. He holds up a bag of seed. "Here is seed for you." Then in verse 24, he explains the new arrangement. "At the harvest, you give 1/5, just 1/5, to Pharaoh. The other 4/5, that's yours, to plant for next year and to feed your families." These are the new terms. This is the new law.
So yeah, 20%. That's the number. Joseph basically invents a national flat tax. And this isn't some temporary emergency tax either. This is a permanent change to the entire Egyptian economy that will last for centuries. He single-handedly turned a nation of independent landowners into a nation of sharecroppers for the government.
So how did the people react to this? You might expect riots, right? But no, look at verse 25. Their reaction is stunning. They say, "You have saved our lives. Let us be Pharaoh's servants." They're not angry, they're grateful. It's this incredible mix of relief that they're alive and submission to their new reality. And then verse 26 makes it permanent. Joseph has this law written down, probably carved into stone. It becomes a statute, a law of the land, to this day, as the text says.
Okay, now we're going to hit the fast-forward button. Years go by. The famine is a distant memory. Egypt's new social order is firmly in place, and the camera zooms back in, away from the big political story, to a very small, very personal one, Jacob's final days.
So verse 27 shows us the situation in Goshen. And what a contrast. While the rest of Egypt was selling themselves into servitude, Jacob's family, the Israelites, they acquired possessions, and they grew and multiplied exceedingly. They are thriving. Then, verse 28 gives us the time frame. Jacob has now lived in Egypt for 17 years. He's 147 years old, and he knows his time is running out.
And this brings us to verse 29. The scene is quiet, intimate. Picture Jacob, weak in his bed, calling his powerful son Joseph to his side. He asks him to make the most binding oath of that time. "Please, put your hand under my thigh." And then he makes his final request. His voice may be weak, but his words are strong. "Promise me you will not bury me in Egypt."
Verse 30 tells us why. He looks at Joseph and says, "I want to lie with my fathers. You have to carry me out of Egypt and bury me in their burial place." Think about that. After all the prosperity, all the safety in Egypt, his heart, his identity is still back in the land of promise with his ancestors. And Joseph, looking at his father, gives the perfect answer. "I will do as you say."
But his simple promise isn't enough for Jacob. In verse 31, he presses him, "Swear to me." He needs that absolute, unbreakable oath, and Joseph swears. The chapter closes on this beautiful, powerful image. Old Israel, his final wish secured, bowing in worship or maybe just relief, right there on the head of his bed. His journey is almost over. So when you pull it all together, what do we have? We've got Joseph's brilliant and maybe ruthless crisis management. We have an entire nation making the choice between survival and freedom. We have a father's dying wish to be buried in his true home. And we see how saving one small family completely restructured the most powerful empire on earth.
And that leaves us with this one big, complicated question to chew on. Joseph absolutely saved millions from starving to death, no question. But in the process, he essentially turned them into property of the state. So what does it really mean to save a people? Is he a hero, a brilliant administrator, or something else entirely? That's the complex legacy of Genesis 47.